My name is Brenda and I'm 35 years old. I live with my mother in the same house I grew up in. I work in a medium-sized company and lead a fairly simple life while supporting my mother who has faced significant health challenges. My mother had heart surgery 3 years ago. At one point the doctors warned us to prepare for the worst, but my mother with her tenacity beat the odds and is now recovering. Despite taking a lot of medication and going to the hospital every few weeks for checkups, she is living a relatively healthy life, thanks in part to the daily exercise she does since her surgery. Since her operation, I have made it a point to stay by her side. It is the least I can do after all she has done for me. Some may think it is strange for a woman my age to still live at home, but I find joy in spending time with my mother. We often go out at weekends, just the two of us, we try new cafes and enjoy delicious treats. It is these simple pleasures that give my life meaning. My father is another story. He works tirelessly running his company and comes home late most days, too tired to do anything. I can see the love he has for our family and the little things he does. But lately my father has had more and more days when he doesn't feel well and I can't help but worry. I also have an older brother, Philip, who is 2 years older than me. Unlike me, Philip has always been the reckless one. Even when my father tried to involve him in the family business, Philip was always dismissive. "Why should I help with your failing business? You chose that life, not me," he'd say. Worse, he often used company funds for his late-night outings, creating a financial mess that my parents did their best to protect me from. Despite my father's best efforts, his relationship with Philip was always strained. They clashed over almost everything, and it only got worse as my brother grew older, even now, as a 37-year-old. She's 7 years younger than Philip, and from what little I know of her, she seems to be a mirror image of him, reckless and inconsiderate. Just a week ago, Philip called me, "Brenda, I'm bringing Holly over next week for our engagement, so make sure the house is clean and ready, and tell Dad and Mum too," he said, his tone as patronizing as ever. I was annoyed. "Why can't you tell them yourself, Philip?" I asked, but he brushed me off despite my irritation. I informed my parents. My mother sighed heavily, clearly dreading the visit, but my parents, ever hopeful, decided to give them a proper welcome, believing that perhaps marriage would finally make Philip mature. When the weekend arrived, Philip and Holly turned up. To say it was awkward would be an understatement. Holly walked in with a smug look on. Her face, her miniskirt, and heavy makeup contrasted with the gloomy atmosphere of our living room. She greeted us with an attitude that made my skin crawl. My mother, ever the gracious host, tried to make conversation. "Do you work somewhere, Holly?" she asked politely. Holly's reaction was immediate. She snapped. "Work? No, I don't work, and I don't intend to. I'm going to be a housewife, and I won't be helping with any of your family business nonsense." I was stunned. My mother was visibly hurt, and my father, though calm, had a hardened expression. We endured the rest of the visit in discomfort. What on earth was that? My father muttered his disappointment. Clearly she acted as if we were beneath her. I added the anger that was boiling inside me that night. We decided to keep as far away from Philip and his future wife as possible. The visit had made one thing clear: nothing had changed about my brother, and Holly seemed even worse. A few weeks later, Philip called me again. He had already registered the marriage and was now demanding a wedding. I reluctantly gave him a generous sum a few days after Holly rang to thank me, although it sounded more like she was mocking me. "Thank you for the money. I thought your father's company was failing, so I didn't expect much." She laughed. I couldn't believe her audacity. I hung up feeling both angry and sad at the disrespect she had shown my parents. Then one morning, as I was preparing to take my mother to one of her regular hospital visits, our home phone rang. "Brenda, something terrible has happened. Your father has collapsed at work. He's being taken to hospital." My heart sank. I immediately informed my mother, and we rushed to the hospital in a taxi. Fear and anxiety gripped us as we prayed in silence for my father's safety. When we arrived at the hospital, we were ushered into the emergency room. A nurse showed us to a room, and when I opened the door, there was my father already gone. I stood there, unable to process what had happened, my mother breaking down beside me, her sobs echoing in the sterile hospital room. I had informed Philip on the way to the hospital, but his response had been indifferent. "I'm at work. I can't leave just because of an emergency. It's probably nothing serious," he said before hanging up. Even after I told him about our father's death, I couldn't believe his insensitivity. My contempt for my brother increased tenfold at that moment with my father's sudden death. My mother and I had to deal with the funeral arrangements in the midst of our grief. The thought of my father's business crossed my mind. What will happen to the business now? I wondered aloud. My mother pulled out a thick notebook. This is your father's manual for running the business he wanted you to take over. He wanted you to take over if anything ever happened to him," she said, her eyes filled with both sadness and hope. I picked up the notebook and felt the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. "I'll do it, Mum. I'll do my best." I promised her. The day of the funeral came, and as expected, Philip and Holly turned up, but their behavior was appalling. "Hey, Brenda. How long are you going to mooch off our parents?" Philip sneered at the wake. "You're just a parasite living off Mum. As the eldest son, I'm taking over the business. Pack your bags and get out," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. Holly, standing next to him, threw water from her glass in my face and laughed. I'd never felt such anger before. They'd insulted me. My mother and my late father's memory. I decided then and there that I would sever all ties with them, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. "Fine, I'll go," I said, feigning defeat. Philip and Holly seemed pleased, their eyes glittering with greed. "Now Dad's business, and the house will be ours," Philip said loudly. "Enough. Will be ours," Philip said, loud enough for me to hear Holly giggle. "We'll be rich, and I'll be the president's wife. Doesn't that sound wonderful?" They were so blinded by their ambition that they didn't even question why I agreed. So easily I packed my bags and left the house, but not before making sure my mother was safe and understood the plan. I intended to keep my role as the next president of the company a secret until after the funeral. During the funeral, Philip pompously announced to my father's employees as the eldest son of the president. His arrogance was unbearable, and I could see the discomfort among the employees. My mother sighed beside me, her face filled with disappointment. Philip and Holly truly believed they had won, but they had no idea what was to come. After the funeral, the real work began. My father's employees were loyal and had no intention of following Philip. When he tried to visit the company, they refused him entry, informing him that the new president had already been chosen. I told him that the new president had already been chosen. The indignation in Philip's voice when he called me was almost satisfying. "What did you do, Brenda?" "They told me you were the president, so I quit my job," he shouted, his voice cracking. "How could Dad leave his company to someone like you?" he demanded. I remained calm. "Dad knew you only thought of yourself. Philip and I know about your gambling debts. You were never fit to take over." I said, "What? How do you know about that?" he stammered, his bravado crumbling. I explained how, on my father's advice, I had done a background check on Philip and discovered his massive debts. He had planned to use the company to pay off what he owed. It was despicable. Holly then picked up the phone, her voice shrill with anger. "Brenda, your brother is suffering. You have to help him. You are heartless," she screamed. I remained unmoved. "You created these debts. Deal with them yourselves. Don't contact me or Mom." Again, I replied before hanging up. Philip and Holly had relied on my father to help them. Philip and Holly had relied on my father's money to solve all their problems. But without the company, they were out of luck. They had nothing left but their debts. The last I heard, they were both working in a factory struggling to make ends meet. Divorce seemed imminent. It was poetic justice. They were finally facing the consequences of their selfish actions. As for me, I took over my father's company, and although it hasn't been easy, I am determined to make him proud. My mother has been my biggest support. My brother and his wife are no longer a part of our lives, and I intend to keep it that way. They chose their path, and now they must live with the consequences. My father's legacy is safe with me, and I will do everything in my power to honor his memory and make the company thrive. The road ahead is long, but I am ready. My father taught me that, and now, as I sit in his old office and look at the family photo on the desk, I know that I am exactly where I am meant to be. Philip's betrayal has only strengthened my resolve. I am no longer just Brenda, the daughter who lives at home. I am Brenda, the president of my father's company, and I will ensure that his hard work and dreams are preserved for the future.